Welcome to Life List, a birding podcast.
Hello, welcome everyone. This is Life List, a birding podcast. I am George Armistead here with my co-host, Molly Brown. Molly, how are you doing today?
Hey, George. Doing fine. Kind of in the summer doldrums. But yeah, it's going really well. I feel like with our guest that we're about to introduce that it sounds like I'm just saying this for his sake. But it's been really good for plants recently because we seeded a bunch of big sections of land last year. And in the past couple weeks, a few things have just started coming up that I wasn't really sure if they'd taken or not. So that's been how July has been for me. Just a lot of like Susans and even some coneflower that I really wasn't noticing until it started blooming. There's a big patch of swamp milkweed, which we haven't had on the property before. It's coming up really nicely. So that's kind of been my fascination lately.
Nice. That's awesome.
How about you?
Well, I'm scratching and itching. I was out down on the Eastern Shore, Maryland, this weekend, and must have wandered into some chiggers.
Oh no!
Or berry bugs, as they're known, these larval mites, and I suspect our listeners, by and large, are familiar with those. But I react to those really pretty strongly, and so I'm an itching and scratching. But it was worth it. Got my first Luna moth on our farm place there. A beautiful big one.
That's cool.
Yeah, I was pretty stoked about that. That was probably the highlight of the past few days. But yeah, I think we should waste no time. We have a guest we're really excited to have with us that knows a thing or two about bugs and pollinator plants and pollinators. And that is Dr. Doug Tallamy. Doug is an entomologist, conservationist, and professor at the University of Delaware, whose work has transformed our understanding of the relationship between native plants and wildlife. His research and books, including Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, have inspired millions to see their own yards as part of the solution to the biodiversity crisis. Driven by the belief that everyone can play a role, Doug co-founded Homegrown National Park to encourage people to plant natives in the spaces they care for. His vision is simple. When we all take part, we create the connected habitats that life depends on. His books have definitely become something of a Bible, I think, for Molly and myself and many others. Doug, it is a real pleasure and an honor to have you with us today. How are you doing, Doug Tallamy?
Well, appreciate the invitation. I'm doing fine. I am not itching for once. I'm itch-free. I'm not sure why, but
yeah.
Great thing.
Is that a good thing?
It's a good thing, yeah.
Yeah, I imagine you find yourself in a position to be itching and scratching pretty regular. What have you been doing to keep busy lately?
A lot of email, a lot of podcasts, a lot of phone calls. We had the big hot spell, so we weren't out as much as usual. But I have had a stretch where I've been home almost 2 weeks, and that's been great. Little chainsawing. I've planted so many things at home that I've lost my light in a lot of places, and plus we heat with wood, so gotta get ready for next winter. We had the ash borer come through and kill most of our ashes, so I'm taking those down, and that's what we're going to heat with. But yeah, easy to keep busy.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And you're in Pennsylvania, right?
Right, Oxford, Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
The great state of Pennsylvania. I never miss an opportunity to plug the home state here.
I can almost see it from over here in almost heaven.
Mm-hmm.
We just had a big maple tree come down. So my husband and I live on 42 acres of old strip mine. 25 acres or so of that is woods that was logged, I think, in the 70s or so. So it's very rocky. They basically had cleared this field and like dumped all of the rock that they'd removed into the woods. So a lot of things don't take root particularly well, or they're growing over top of the rocks. But as much as I like having the maples around, just a big healthy tree coming down, I'm so excited because it created a huge gap of light right in the middle of the thickest part of the woods. So we're cutting that up tonight, and I can't wait to see what happens, where that's going to grow in. So I'm actually excited, even though it's a nice tree that came down.
Yeah, well, good luck. Watch for those invasives. That's where they want to come in, right? Right, that light gap.
Yeah. We've done a little bit of management for that. We've had this property for 6 years, but I guess we should back up. I know that a lot of listeners of this podcast have read your books and know about Homegrown National Park and native planting, but I think we should talk from the beginning a little bit. And maybe we start with the Homegrown National Park concept, if that sounds good to you, Doug.
Sure.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, we can approach that in a couple different ways. A lot of people want to know how I came up with the idea. And I came up with the idea this was way back in 2007, I think. I saw the statistic that we had converted 40 million acres of this country into lawn. It's now about 44 million acres. So, 40 million, how big is that? It's actually bigger than all of New England combined. But
Wow.
I said, well, what if we cut half of that lawn in half, or, just reduced it by half? That would give us 20 million acres to work with. And how big is that? And I started to add up all the national parks in the lower 48, and it didn't equal 20 million acres. So I said, gee, let's make a new national park out of the restored areas right in our yard that were once lawn. We'll call it Homegrown National Park because we're doing it at home, and it'll be great. And I started talking about it in my talks. When I wrote Nature's Best Hope, I dedicated a chapter to it. But that's all I did. I mean, it wasn't really a thing. Around 2020, I gave a talk in, must have been before COVID, but I gave a talk in Connecticut. And Michelle Alfandari had just retired from a branding career, whatever that is, in Manhattan. And her husband's a painter, and he wanted a big barn to paint in. And so they moved up to Connecticut. And she was a perfect example of what we call the non-choir, somebody who has no exposure to nature, doesn't appreciate it, doesn't know why we need it. Well, anyway, she was up there, and I was giving a talk, and one of her neighbors insisted that she go to this talk because they own some property now, and they didn't know how to deal with it. So they dragged her to the talk. She came up to me afterwards, and she said, "You're not reaching your target audience." And I said, she said, "You only talk to the choir." I said, "Well, it's only the choir that invites me." And she said, "Well, you want to reach the people who don't already know this." I said, I know. She said, "You got to do social media, and you should have a small nonprofit to spearhead this message for the non-choir." And I said, "I agree with you, but I don't do any of that. I'm supposed to be a scientist. I'm supposed to be gathering data, doing research." And she said, "Well, I do that, and I think we should work together." Now, other people had approached me in the past, and I'd always said no, but I must have been at a weak spot or something, but I said, okay. So we started Homegrown National Park as a small nonprofit. And when I say we, that's the point where Michelle really took over. I mean, she created a board and really started to run the show. So we now have an executive director and I guess 3 paid employees, a board. We're still small, but it is a real nonprofit. And the mission is, our vision is to have conservation landscaping become default. That's what everybody has. And then if you want to change it, okay. But if you move to a new property, it's already going to be landscaped. The developers are already going to keep conservation in mind when they're developing corporate landscapes, everything. That's the vision. Now, we're a long way from that, but that means we're going to have to reach private landowners everywhere. About 78% of the country is privately owned. And the reason we're focusing on private landowners is because we've got parks and we've got preserves, but we're headed towards the sixth great extinction. It's just not working. It's not enough. So we need to landscape the areas between those parks and preserves in a way that biodiversity, that plants and animals can have viable habitat. And that will connect those parks and preserves so that they're no longer isolated, no longer small. And that's going to make the big difference for this biodiversity crisis. But that means everybody who owns private property has got to play this game. And most people don't have a clue that is their responsibility. We claim we own a piece of the earth. Well, if you own the earth, you own the responsibility of taking care of it. And if we don't take care of the earth, we're all doomed. So this is not optional. This is our basic responsibility. And that's the function of Homegrown National Park, is to get that message to everybody so that everybody, whether you own 500,000 acres in the West or a balcony in Philadelphia, everybody needs to participate. Because not only are we going to actually transform land, we're going to transform the culture so that conservation becomes important. You look at an election coming up, you look at the top 10 things people are worried about, conservation's not on the list. Every once in a while, climate change makes it to number 10, but as if these things are not important. We want to get it right up there where it belongs. And that means everybody's got to understand how important it is. And that's another major function of Homegrown National Park.
I wish people would start framing these as public health issues.
Absolutely. Yeah.
More often politicians, I think, could get a lot more traction if they were to do that. But I will say, I find it, obviously I'm a big fan. I'm a fanboy, and and I love the Homegrown National Park Instagram. I follow that avidly, and have gone through who the Instagram is following to find more good information as well. It does strike me that this is really picking up steam. Like, I just went to Atlanta in the spring, and I swear, obviously, I was firmly amongst the choir there, but still, I was just shocked at how pervasive the idea of managing for native plants, native landscapes was there. And even within, the city has all sorts of stuff going on. I forget what it's called, but there's this old railroad tracks, I guess, that goes all around the city. And
Really?
they've redone all that in native plants. And I mean, that equates to quite a bit of land. And everybody else there was talking about, their native plant garden and how they were working on it. And I hear that a lot around here, but I think it has a lot to do with the community in which I live. But people that are friends of mine that are not birders, that are not really, I would say, nature people, are interested in this idea. I mean, I think everyone loves the idea of not having to mow grass as much. That's also a good pitch point, I think. But I'd be curious to know from you what you've seen in the growth of this movement, and where you've seen it go and where you think it could go.
Yeah, well, I have been talking about it for more than 20 years now. And when I wrote Bringing Nature Home, I didn't think anybody'd read it, and that'd be the end of that. But I was wrong about that. And I think
you were.
The timing's correct. People are upset at the statistics we continually hear. We've lost a third of our birds, and we got global insect decline, and 2/3 of Earth's wildlife's already gone. All these terrible things we hear about all the time are upsetting. But people think, well, gee, what can I do? What can one person do to turn this around? And that's our message. One person can do a lot. Don't worry about the whole planet. Just worry about the piece of the planet you can influence. And that empowers you. Then all of a sudden, you're part of the solution. Everybody can improve their landscape. I can improve my landscape. This is a process. We can do it every single day. And then we feel empowered, and that's such a positive feeling. Not only that, you can see that it works. You can see the nature come back to your little space. Is that going to save the entire planet? No, but it's going to be part of it. It's going to be part of it. If we get everybody doing it, it's going to be a big part of it. So I think that's it. The feeling of empowerment has really made it grow. The demand for native plants outstrips the supply now, and has for a couple of years. That's a business opportunity.
Mhm.
I read the New York Times a couple of weeks ago that the real estate industry is starting to catch on, that well-landscaped conservation landscapes are actually selling for higher than asking prices.
I saw
And
that
so they're
article. I was
saying,
going to ask you about that. I was like, I
yeah,
love that idea. Like
that's
from a
going to make all the difference in the world.
yeah.
It wasn't long ago. They said, rip it all out and put in lawn, or you won't sell your house. Well, not anymore.
Mhm.
Not anymore. There's a growing market there. So that's all really encouraging.
I think that was a
Yeah.
New York Times article where they even showed a couple properties where part of the asking price ended up being well below what they got, because people were like, well, wait a minute, this garden is like, a little haven. It's a refuge, not just for, birds and butterflies and fun wildlife, but for us. And yeah.
This is what more and more people have worried about. They put a lot of effort into converting their yard. They're very happy with it. But then they age out and they've got to go to a retirement community or something, and they worry, well, what's going to happen to my landscape? So now more and more there's a market for like-minded people to buy your landscape, and that's
Mhm.
really encouraging. So
Yep. And well, speaking as a millennial, it's certainly generational change as well, because what I'm doing, both with birds and native plants, is suddenly cool, and it wasn't cool when I started 10 years ago, let alone beyond that. My hometown news outlet this morning, I saw on Facebook, had an article about how greenhouses can't keep native plants in stock, and the byline said 5 years ago they couldn't give these plants away, and now they can't keep them on the shelves. And it it feels so good. I mean, just being someone who's taking part in that, who's just conscious and making choices that move toward increasing biodiversity with native landscaping, to see others want to be a part of it too. And I think that's a really cool thing about Homegrown National Park, and the way that you framed your books to make every individual feel a part of it. I mean, it's a way of creating community, right? It's almost like you're in the club if you have milkweed in your yard and you see a monarch caterpillar on it, or if you notice a luna moth, or just any of those things too. I hear a lot of folks like that that I went to school with who don't have any sort of outdoor conservation mindset, who are suddenly getting native plants, and
that's great.
it's really
That's
fun.
great.
Yeah. I think I do see it a little differently too. And I actually, a couple years ago, was going to write an article, and actually drafted an article for a regional magazine about native plants and wildlife corridors. And we kind of butt heads on it, and how we went about it. And I was referencing your books for them, but it is a different mindset here sometimes, because, I mean, West Virginia is the third most forested state in the U.S., 82%. You look around and you see trees, and you see overgrown fields and things that, make you feel like you're surrounded by nature. And I certainly recognize plants a lot more than I did, when I was, I don't know, even in high school and college. It's something that I've put a lot of effort into. So I know I see a field differently than I used to. But I do find that to be sort of a local challenge, as people feel like we have enough nature because there are hayfields, or, or, autumn olive covered pasture, or things like that too. So, I don't know what the question is in that, but it's something that I recognize a lot in rural areas where that change is starting to happen as well.
Yeah. It is a harder sell. when you're in West Virginia or Washington State or, some of these places where it's not as bad as Southeast Pennsylvania or, the Carter from New York all the way down to Richmond. It's just totally ripped. And of course, that's where most of the people are too. So, but that you mentioned your hayfield loaded with autumn olive. Autumn olive is not going to do what you need it to do. So being green is one thing, but being green with the plants that are really the powerhouses is another thing. And that's where the management has to come in. So even in West Virginia, you have your work cut out for you.
I'd say so. And I guess, this is a goal of biodiversity. That's like the lens that we're looking at for this, right? Because there are advantages that I think have to be acknowledged for something that's green versus pavement. There's
Sure.
the cooling effects and the carbon sequestration and those kinds of things. So it's so complex, and I see so many different entities that have a desire for plant life, but we're looking at it through all these different lenses. And it's, as you said, I think one of the things that's really rewarding from the biodiversity standpoint is that you can see results almost instantly. If you plant something, there's a chance that a pollinator that is attracted to it is going to nearly immediately appear. And I love the feeling of reward that you can get just in your backyard for that.
Yeah, I've had my knuckles wrapped a couple of times by particularly urban foresters. In one of my talks, I liken a ginkgo tree to a statue. I say, it's pretty as saying there, but it's not contributing. And they say, well, wait a minute. Yes, it is contributing. It's sequestering carbon, and it's managing the watershed, and it's lowering the heat island effect in the cities. And that is all true. My perspective has always been the food web. Plants, one of the major things they do is capture the energy from the sun and turn it into food. And if you don't get that food to animals, you don't have any animals. If you don't have animals, you don't have a functional ecosystem. It is not the only thing they do, by far, but it's a really important thing. So when I say ginkgos are statues, I'm talking about the food web. Nothing eats a ginkgo, so it's not adding any energy to the local food web. But yeah, that is an issue. I tend to overstate it sometimes, my enthusiasm. But yeah, plants are good. They're much better than pavement.
Well, I used to work for the American Forest Foundation, so you can imagine the voices that I had in my head. But I think that's what's important, is to have a champion for biodiversity that is speaking to the masses and talking about that too. Because, as you said, that is the ultimate goal, right?
Well, we've had this idea for 100 years that plants are just decorations. And we've become so separated from nature, we've actually forgotten. No, they're actually making the food that supports all the life on Earth. The average person walking down the street doesn't know that. They're not thinking about that. And it's not their fault. They were never taught that. So that's why we keep hammering away at that. Being green is not good enough. You have to be green and contribute, and you have to contribute that the food, the simple sugars and carbohydrates that all animals need. And then you have a functional ecosystem.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned the ginkgo tree, which is something we've got quite a lot of here in Philadelphia. But I think we had the oldest. We had one of the oldest in the country, certainly in Philly, that I believe got struck down by lightning fairly recently. But this is something I struggle with on my walks, because the bird walks that I lead, we'll see a lot of sapsucker holes and birds that do use ginkgos, but and I guess it makes me wonder about street trees in general. And one of my friends, I told him we were going to be talking today, and he's like, ask him about ecological traps and street trees, and how certain bugs, right? Like, they might start off pretty well if the right species of tree is there, but if there's no leaf litter for them, it's sort of a dead end. And I guess I also have a good friend who is a tree tender downtown, and he's trying very hard to get the city to replace many of its non-native trees with native trees as the turnover happens slowly over time. What advice would you have for him doing that kind of work? And what I guess what would be? I'm not sure what an example of an ecological trap is,
Well,
or if you'd have one.
You just named some. It's true. Let's say I plant an oak on a street, and it actually does attract the insects that use that oak. Some of them, anyway. We did a study, and the larger moths tend not to be using it because in the heart of the city they get picked off by lights and other things before they even get there. But some of the smaller moths can colonize the oak and have generation after generation on a single tree. But what do they need to complete that generation? It's an excellent question. And what's happening under that tree is really important. Most of the species that use trees, most of the caterpillars, let's say, don't complete their development on the tree. They drop from the tree, and then they have to pupate underground. They either tunnel into the ground under the tree, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. If it's cement, if it's lawn, there is no leaf litter under the tree. And that's an ecological trap. You've pulled in the adult, they lay the eggs, the larvae develop, and then it doesn't make it to adulthood again. And it's a concern that we don't want to plant really attractive things in our cities and draw things in and then kill them. So what we have to do is that's one alternative. The other one is to complete the transformation so that they have everything they need. It doesn't have to be cement under all of our trees. We can put beds under our trees. We don't have to have lawn under every tree in our yards. We can have well-planted beds so that these caterpillars, and that's the main food for the birds when they're reproducing, can actually complete the development and do it again. So we do there's no doubt that in some cases we've created ecological traps. We have to keep going and keep learning what these animals need to complete their development. We're doing it. And the transformation is continuing. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. But the concept of ecological traps is very important, and we do need to think about it. There's a really good example in Argois, Switzerland, which is an urban area. There was a herpetologist who noticed that there were 10 species of frogs and salamanders that were decreasing rapidly in this city. So he dug little ponds all over the city. Somehow he got permission to do that, and he started to monitor their populations, and all of them but one increased rapidly. The one that didn't increase was it actually required larger ponds than he dug. So that was despite the lights, it was despite the traffic and the roads and everything else, they still increased. So that's an example of what could be an ecological trap actually turning into producing more than it killed, and that's what we're talking about. If we landscape the verges on our roads, all the mowed areas now, if we put in the milkweeds and all the flowering plants, are we inviting monarchs and everything into that area so that they can get hit by cars? We did a study with that, and actually, if you do that in the medians in the middle, there's no way they can get to that without crossing traffic, and that can be an issue. But on the side of the road, apparently it works pretty well, particularly in farm areas where you don't have a lot of heavy traffic. That's one of the major reasons that monarch populations have crashed in the last 20 years is with the advent of Roundup-ready corn and soybeans, growers just started to spray right up to the road, and they replaced all the weeds, which was milkweed and asters and goldenrod, all the things our native bees and our monarchs need. They replaced them with lawn, which, of course, doesn't satisfy anything. So converting that back to the native plant communities that support our native bees and our monarchs and everything else is an important part of that conservation. But got to make sure we're not going to kill them with our traffic. So should we do that next to a major highway that's where all the cars are going 70 miles an hour? We need a little bit more research to think about it. But
roadways and road ecology is a topic I've wanted to talk about on the podcast, but I find it so depressing that I haven't committed to suggesting we do a full episode on it. Talking about ecological traps, I know I already talked about hayfields, but I always think about bobolinks being a pretty classic example of that, where you entice them in and then you mow their nests. And George, I was kind of laughing as you were saying that you had questions from friends. Everybody that I've mentioned that we were going to do this interview to has followed up with some question that they wanted me to ask, which is very fun. And I understand why you've written many books, because there are a lot of directions that we can go. Do we want to talk about keystone species a little bit? It's something that I actually read in a book recently about the overuse of the term keystone species and how it's just so popular and used so much now. And I know it wasn't a term that you coined, but I think that the concept of something being an ecological anchor in your space is really well known because of your books too. But we also talked about how we kind of want this podcast to, be like tips for our listeners too. So do you want to talk about how a backyard gardener can use a keystone species?
Sure. Well, let's briefly review what a keystone species is. You're right, it's not my term. Robert Payne came up with this back in the late 60s or early 60s, working with tidal pools in the state of Washington. And he noticed that if you took out starfish, which are predators, then the sea urchins and other things exploded, and diversity actually went down. So he said, well, the starfish are keystone species in that their presence, many other species depend on their presence. Beavers are keystone species. Elephants are keystone species. They're ecosystem engineers that create opportunities for many, many other species. We've been looking at how caterpillars use plants and which plants they're using. And we amassed these giant data sets looking at host use in caterpillars across the country. And we now have data set for every county in the country. There's 12,000 plus species of moths and butterflies in this country. So it's a big data set. Which plants are they using? To make a long story short, about 14% of our native plants are supporting about 90% of the moths and butterflies in the country. Now, if you have a bird that requires 5,000 caterpillars to complete one nest, you got to make those caterpillars. Which plant is going to make the most caterpillars? And it depends on where you are, but it's going to be the keystone plants that are doing that. I can design a 100% native landscape that produces almost nothing. So it's really not native versus non-native. It's functionality, which is contributing the most energy to local food webs. And in 84% of the counties in which they occur, it is one of our oaks. They're the top keystone species. As you move further north and you get past where oaks are distributed, then it becomes willows. Cottonwoods are really important in the drier areas, the riparian areas of the West. So it depends on where you are. But if you don't have those powerhouses, then the food web is really depauperate and the birds can't reproduce anymore. So we talk about food web collapse. Sure, there's some things living there, but not nearly what could be if you use the plants to support the most food, particularly for birds. This is really so much about birds because 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects. We do have finches and doves and crossbills, and they're rearing their young on seeds. They can make a little milk out of the seeds. And that's why that's what you see in our cities. You see house sparrow, which is really a finch. You see house finch. You see doves.
Goldfinches, yeah.
Goldfinches, they're all seed eaters. But the insect eaters tend to drop out because we don't make enough insects in our urban areas. And we're starting to, there's so many places, we're not making enough insects anywhere. And my friend Dave Wagner is spending a lot of time working on the causes of insect decline. And again, it depends on where you are, but climate change is a huge one, particularly the whole Southwest. This year, so we're in the Philadelphia area. In May, we had 2 days, it got up to 90 degrees, and then the next night it got down to 25. And it had pushed out, the oaks had flushed, almost all the trees had flushed, killed all the leaves. killed the leaves and killed the catkins, killed my pawpaws, killed not the plant, but the reproductive parts. So everything flushed out again. But all of those caterpillars that would use that early foliage for the migrating birds, they were all killed. So it's a tough spring. And I'm looking at what has made it through there. We've had birds and they've all reproduced on our property. I haven't seen anything with more than one offspring, one baby. That's our chickadees, and it's just not very much to eat. That's one climate change event. And we're getting that irregularity all the time now. Very, very hard on.
And that was after a winter where we had like 3 weeks of ice covering the ground.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple keystone trees, and you wrote, and folks may or may not be familiar with your book, The Magic of Oaks, which details a lot of this, and is again something that especially if you're a birder, but anybody should really take a look at, because oaks are really the best bird feeders around. We have an 80-year-old willow oak that my grandmother planted in the back of our yard in Maryland, and I always say that's the best bird feeder on the property. But I'm curious, are there some pollinator plants that you would characterize as keystones?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where you say we're overusing the term. Whether or not a species functions as a keystone depends on what else is in that community. So they always think of it as a Jenga model. If you pull out one bar, it makes other bars more important than they used to be. And that's why, there's some people, you can overuse the term. Everything can be a keystone under particular circumstances. But you can talk about keystones for woody plants, keystones for herbaceous plants, keystones for pollinators. The concept holds, though. There's still some plants that are doing a whole lot more than others. If you're talking about keystones for perennial plants or annuals that are producing so many of the flowers for many of our bees, goldenrod, number one in a lot of places of the country. Perennial sunflowers, number one. Number two, fall asters, very important. So I'm getting to rank those because I know about specialist bees, the bees that require the pollen of particular plants. It's not that we don't have generalist bees going to a lot of plants, including a lot of non-native plants, but the specialist bees need pollen from particular plants. Our specialist bees in North America, it's always going to be native plants. That's what they specialized on. So if you want to make a pollinator garden that's going to help the most pollinators, you want to plant the plants that are best for specialist pollinators, because the generalists can use those plants as well. And so that's why goldenrod in this Philadelphia area, it supports something like 12 species of specialist pollinators. If you move to Ohio or Indiana, it becomes perennial sunflowers, where they support maybe 14. But if you have goldenrod, sunflowers, and asters, you're supporting over 40 species of native bees that won't be there if you don't have those plants. So those would be the keystones in a lot of places of the country. I think there's 60 species of bees in California that require the pollen of sunflowers, perennial sunflowers. So you're right. The keystone concept can be overused. It doesn't make it invalid. They're really important plants.
That's right. Makes sense. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about, I think you can buy native plants from Lowe's now. I mean, they're advertised everywhere. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on different cultivars of native plants and where folks source native plants from if they're purchasing individual plants. How have you seen that changing, and what advice do you have for folks who are shopping for them?
Yeah, that's two issues. You do want to plant the plants that are best adapted to your ecoregion. So getting plants where the seed came from, the latitude, the altitude where you live, is important. Those plants are guaranteed to do really well. If you wander outside that area and you plant a plant, is it bad? well, the plant might not do as well. It's not bad. It'll die, and you get something else that's going to work. But that's called provenance. You want to stick to the provenance of your area as best you can. And more nurseries are growing things with provenance in mind, rather than growing a California plant and selling it here. Blue spruce is a specialist in the Colorado Rockies. It grows fine in Delaware, but is it contributing in Delaware? Not very much, because it's totally outside of the plant community and insect community that it co-evolved with. So that's why it's not just plants from North America, it's plants native to your particular ecoregion that's really important. Cultivars are just a genetic variant of a particular species. People call a cultivar of a native plant a nativar. That's a made-up word. It's call it cultivar or nativar, it doesn't matter. And the question is that as good as the straight species? Well, it depends on what the cultivar is. It depends on what that genetic variant is. We did a study at Mount Cuba Center, a common garden experiment for 3 years, looking at the straight species and then its cultivars planted in a circle around it. So you could compare insect use to see which cultivars performed as well as the straight species. These were all woody plants, so we were not looking at the thousands of cultivars of flowering plants. Well, they're all flowering plants, but we were looking at woody traits. And the only thing that consistently decreased insect use was turning a green leaf into something as red or purple. That loads the leaf with anthocyanins, which are feeding deterrents. So I can say, if you're concerned about your contribution to your local food web, avoid red leaf cultivars. They're very popular. Everybody likes red leaf, red bud, and the other thing to avoid, obviously, for pollinators would be double flowers. So like double flower bloodroot. It's a beautiful plant, very thick. All the hydrangeas, the cultivars are double flowers, but that has taken the reproductive parts of the plant and turned them into petals. So that's why they're so pretty, but now they're not functioning in terms of producing pollen or nectar for pollinators. That becomes an ecological trap. The bees will still go there, hoping there's something there. They've spent energy going there, but there's nothing there. So then they have to move on. So again, it depends if you're really just planting for decorations, they're beautiful plants. But if you're planting for function and you want to get, let's say, a native hydrangea, get Hydrangea arborescens straight species, not Hydrangea arborescens Annabelle, because Annabelle is it's a double flower, and it's taken away the pollinator contributions of that particular plant. The other problem with cultivars is that they're cloned in order to perpetuate the trait that cultivar was developed around. They clone them, which means there's zero genetic variability. And genetic variability is really important. This freeze we had this spring showed it. I've got my driveway is lined with white oaks that I planted, and all of them except 2 got burned. All the foliage was killed by that frost, but 2 of them hadn't flushed out yet. They're behind. They're behind every year. It's just a genotype that is a little bit late, and they were fine. So that's genetic variability. If we were to get that type of frost every single spring, they'd be the only 2 that made it over time. That's the benefit of genetic variability. And with climate change, we need as much genetic variability as we can get. So we know the straight species works. It doesn't mean that the cultivars don't work some of the time. It's just we don't know. The best information out there in terms of flowering plants is being produced by Mount Cuba Center that has been doing trial gardens with a lot of cultivars over the years, several years now, and they have all that information up on their website. So you can go to their website and look at your favorite plant and see how the cultivars have performed compared to the straight species.
That's a great resource. We'll share that in the show notes too. And I want to make sure that we at least mention how much fun it is to look at the Homegrown National Park website. And there's all sorts of resources. I look at it all the time for information on plants that are native to our area and even learning about other areas too. So if folks haven't looked at that before, it's a fun place to play around online and learn about it. And I do want to mention too, I really appreciate that you mentioned that it is okay to have a plant in your yard that is not native. And that this isn't a full switch, that it isn't that it works or it doesn't, right? It's that every little piece helps. And I guess that's the whole concept that you're pushing.
Right. Yeah, let me talk briefly about an experiment Desiree Narango, one of my PhD students, did several years ago now. But she was looking at chickadee reproduction in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And to make a long story short, she found that if 70% of the plant biomass in your yard, so not the number of plants, but the amount of green material in your yard is native, chickadees can reproduce sustainably. So you can have generation after generation. This was a 5-year study, which leaves 30% doesn't have to be native. It's not contributing very, very much. Now, would chickadees do even better if it was 100%? Almost certainly yes. But if you love crepe myrtles and you got to have your crepe myrtle, you can have your crepe myrtle. It's not invasive. And this goes for the ginkgo and so many other plants that are not invasive. We can't tolerate invasive plants. So the burning bush, got to go, because it's producing tens of thousands of seed for each bush, and they don't stay where the bush is. And then it becomes a major, major problem in our natural areas. But 30%, that's a lot of compromise in my view.
Yeah, I think in one of I wanted to ask you sort of about this concept, and I'm not sure I have it quite right, but I seem to remember that I read someplace that you were talking about mulberries, and most of the mulberries we have around here are not the native variety, not the native species, and I think you had said something like, if there's a really big mulberry, right? If you got a big old mulberry and it's producing a lot of fruit, if you take that mulberry out, you better be prepared to replace it with something else. Otherwise, even though it's a non-native tree, you are removing a big chunk of food that was there before. And then I think you got some pushback on that. So people are like, well, you shouldn't have the mulberry anyway. You should really have a native tree there. Curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good example of compromise. You said most of them are the non-native mulberry. Actually, all of them are the non-native mulberry. In this area of the country, according to Rob Nazi, who's rewriting Gleason and Cronquist, very good botanist, he said through hybridization, the white mulberry has hybridized with the red mulberry, and introgression has created the offspring are all white mulberry. And this has been going on since the 1700s. The colonists were encouraged to bring white mulberry over to start a silk moth industry, and that failed, but they actually got a tax break for planting white mulberry. And I always wondered why I could never figure out, trying to tell the difference between white and red mulberry, and you look at the fuzz on the veins, and it was very confusing. That's because everything I was looking at was white mulberry. So, Rob Nazi says you have to go to Texas to find real red mulberry these days. And it's probably going to be a case where white mulberry eliminates that species. What does that mean? Well, you're right. Well, white mulberry makes a lot of fruit. Red mulberry makes a lot of fruit. Neither plant makes a lot of caterpillars. So whether it's native or not, it's contributing fruit to the food web. Neither one makes hardly any caterpillars at all. So if you replace red with white, what has changed? Not much. Not much. So we're looking at the functionality of your landscape. And I'm sensitive to this because when we bought this property, it had been mowed for hay, but there were just a few big trees on it. And one of them was a big white mulberry. And I got my chainsaw out and I chopped it down the very first week. I shouldn't have done that. I mean, that was a big fruit producer. And then I had nothing. So now some have come back in and I've left them. But so again, if you want to be a native plant purist, great, do it. I want to be a functionality purist, and I hurt the function of our yard when I did that.
Interesting. Yeah.
We thought similarly here at our place. We took out autumn olive, and we cleared it out, and we don't really have the brush to support the birds that it was supporting for nesting and other things now too. And I wish that we would have done it in phases a little bit more than we had.
That's a tough one because not only do they need a place to nest, they need the food to support the young. And autumn olive doesn't produce that. So there's the you can get your viburnums in or other things, but you're right. Doing it that make the transition slow enough so that it's not just this huge, like a volcano exploding and wiping out everything. And if you're prepared to put it back quickly, that's great. But then you've got deer issues. Everything you put back is going to be vulnerable to the deer, and you got to protect them. And it's
Oh
a
my
challenge.
gosh, yeah.
It's a challenge,
Yeah. That's a project I've wanted to. Well, we want to do everything. and everything comes at a cost too. I mean, we've had species of birds, which I mean we're very pollinator focused, but I think birds are kind of the main barometer that I personally use on my property to, kind of see how things are changing. And when we're increasing habitat for one species, it might be coming at a cost to another species, especially when we're looking at field conversion.
Mhm.
But gosh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, I was thinking about.
While you're thinking,
Go
that's
ahead,
essentially
yeah.
what happened at our house because, it was 100% field. And we had blue grosbeaks. It was great during the scrub habitat period and indigo bunnings. And we've lost them because now it's basically a forest. But we've gained wood thrush and Kentucky warblers and other oven birds that in an area that used to be a field. And it happened. I mean, we've been here 26 years now, but we've had wood thrush for the last 7 or 8 years. They don't need 100-year-old forests. They do need leaf litter like other thrushes. And once you produce that, then you can get these things. So you're right. Well, this is why people say ecosystems are constantly changing. They are. And change is normal. Changing to less function, that's where I push back. But it's not the change that's important. I want to keep function high,
Yep,
even though it will
makes
change over
sense.
time for sure.
Yeah. I remembered what I was going to say. What I really want to experiment with is doing just small patches of deer fencing kind of
I've
Mhm.
thought
throughout the
about that
field.
too. Yeah,
I mean,
just
I'd
like
love to do big patches, but something realistic that, I can get up on a budget.
Yeah, I encourage that because then you'll get to see exactly what the impact of the deer are. They're not supposed to eat spice bush. Well, I've done that. I've got little patches of deer fencing. I see the extent to which they are eating the spice bush. The spice bush outside the deer exclosures, they're there, but they're tiny and dwarfed and stubby, and so we got a lot of deer. They're hungry.
Yeah. I think deer are yet another podcast episode.
Yeah.
We've I know that we're talking about bigger pieces of land where you can do something like that. And George, it's really cool to think about doing it in your space too, because you've got a small backyard. I'd be curious to hear some more tips. Maybe George, this can be one that you can take because you probably have more of a typical backyard for,
Yeah.
Our listeners.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too. Like, I had it was kind of a two-pronged question. One is like, if you're, let's say you want to start, what's, what would be a couple tips on how to get going? The other is if you're like me and you're say 3-4 years in and like, is there something you should be thinking about that that might not be obvious about maintenance or introducing other species, or what would your advice be for people at the start and maybe people that have been doing it for just a little while?
Well, some of the most important things you can do have nothing to do with plants. And what you want to do is increase the insect diversity and abundance on your property because that's what the birds need. It turns out that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines that we have, and especially the declines in moths, which produce the caterpillars which feed our birds. So change the outdoor lighting. First of all, consider turning it off. You are allowed to turn your lights off, but if you don't want to do that, there's a couple products. One called Bug Light, sold at hardware stores that produces amber light. An even better one is it's a Norb light, Norb, that produces no blue wavelength at all. It's only amber. And during the day, it's it's not yellow, it's white, so it doesn't stand out. People don't like that. But when you turn it on at night, it doesn't attract nocturnal insects. And if everybody did that across the country, it's a really simple change, but it would have a huge, huge impact on insect decline. We tend to think that the solutions are really, really complex. This one's a simple one. It's just so simple. Change your lights. Another one would be think about your entire landscape. Are you hiring a mosquito fogger or a backpack sprayer to control mosquitoes? Because if you are killing everything.
And wasting money, right?
Well, you're also not controlling the mosquitoes. That's right. But in terms of devastating the food web, we just finished an experiment looking at the backpack sprayers where they put down the barrier spray in your property and it's supposed to keep the mosquitoes away. It does knock down mosquitoes for a week or two, but any insect that walks across, or spider, any arthropod that walks across a surface that was sprayed for at least 30 days, that's when we ended our experiment. But some of these guys are saying, oh, it's 70 days. Anyway, they die. That's it. They die in an hour or so. And that it doesn't matter whether they're early stage of development, whether it's an adult, whether it's a small insect, whether it's a big insect, all the pollinators, all the parasitoids, the predators, the monarchs, the moths, it doesn't matter what it is, they all die. So you're creating a 100% dead landscape by hiring these guys. Now, some of them do say, yeah, it kills everything, but bugs are bad, so we want to kill them. Others are it's blatant false advertising. They say it only kills mosquitoes. No, kills everything. So again, what is killing is your bird food. So, you wouldn't want to put a bird seed feeder out there with no seed in it or with poison seed in it. And that's what you're doing when you hire one of these other guys. It's not something a birder would typically think about. Well, I don't like mosquitoes, so I'm gonna hire the mosquito guy. So those are two things that have nothing to do with plants that you can do to make a big difference right away. Another thing I would say is think about how you're landscaping under the trees that are on your property, because that's a vital part of the moths completing their development. You want as big a bed under the tree as you can tolerate. That's what reduces the area that's in lawn. And that's where your leaf litter goes. All the leaf litter on your property should stay on your property. It's returning the nutrients your trees needed or used that year. You got to get them back into the soil.
Plus, you don't have to rake that way. That's you got to
rake them into your bed. I mean, if you keep some lawn, you got to get the leaves off.
I see. Yeah.
And that is the constant goal, is reducing the area that's in lawn. Lawn should be where you walk. 2 acres of lawn is,
useless.
Well, that's just a mowing opportunity, and it destroys the watershed. So, I talk about the 4 things that every landscape has to, 4 ecological responsibilities. And one is support that food web, support the pollinators, manage the watershed, and sequester carbon. And lawn does none of those. So that's why we want to reduce the area that's in lawn.
I think there was a good graphic that I can't remember if it was posted by Homegrown National Park, but it compared like the depths of roots of various different plants. And it started with Kentucky bluegrass, which was like an inch or 2. And then it showed, like lead plant went down like 15 feet or something. And, big blue stem went down like 6 or 8 feet. And I hadn't really thought of it that way before. But it got me thinking about, and I think I've told this story before, but where I'm recording right now is my desk in my basement in the office. And when I first moved in here, if we got a good soak for several days, there'd be a seep where rain would come in. And that never happens anymore, because right outside here is our first bed that we planted with all the stuff you're mentioning. And I think those root systems are just so deep and so pervasive out here that water never has a chance to get inside the house anymore.
Yeah. That's why an acre of prairie sequesters almost as much carbon as an acre of forest, because of those deep roots that are pumping carbon into the soil all the time. And that's why, they've got those deep roots to handle the dry summers that are characterized, particularly our more western areas. And that's also why lawn is the most irrigated crop in the country. And we don't have the water for that. We just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time here, but Doug, I did want to ask if you've got anything coming up or if there's anything else you'd like to share with the folks that are listening that you'd like them to know about.
Well, I do have a new book coming out in March.
Mm.
That's not right around the corner, but it takes forever to get these books out. It'll be a fun book about how moths are protecting themselves, all the crypsis and all the tricks they have to avoid being eaten. Fun for me anyway. I don't know if anybody's going to read it, but I look on these talks with focusing on personal responsibility. We have this idea that nature's nice, but it's not necessary. And that's totally wrong. It's 100% necessary. We're part of nature. We're not going to live here without it. Yet every day we're diminishing it. We've got to turn that around, and we've got to turn that around quickly. But again, your responsibility is just to turn around the piece of the earth that you can manipulate. If you own property, that's what you should focus on. If you don't, help somebody who does. But everybody has a responsibility to good earth stewardship, not just a few conservation biologists or ecologists. So that's a lot of people. That's 8.3 billion people with that responsibility. We really can turn this around if we all exercised it. So that's it. Personal responsibility.
And people underestimate, I think, or don't realize how much fun it is. Getting dirty, getting your hands in the soil, and then watching stuff grow over time is extremely rewarding.
Let me just add, because it turns out most people don't garden. I don't talk about gardeners anymore. I talk about the entire landscape. And what we do is we hire a lawn care industry. And so what I want to do is retrain the lawn care industry so they can become ecological landscapers. You still don't have to do it yourself if you're busy with the kids and everything else. You just hire somebody. But the guy you hire is going to do it responsibly. That's the future that I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's more and more of those folks out there that are doing that work. It's really fun to follow the work. Thank you so much for doing this, Doug. We really appreciate you taking the time. We've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. I think Molly mentioned the idea a couple months ago again. I was like, yeah, we got to try to do that. And so
and
it's
it happened.
Yeah.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Real honor to have you here. So yeah, thanks to Doug, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back again soon with another episode of Life List, a birding podcast. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.